Hey, what's up everybody? I just want to do a very quick video this evening to talk about Pirelli's announcement that they have come to some conclusions following the tyre failures that meant the end of the British Grand Prix suddenly became so dramatic. It wasn't in any way mentioned within their report anything to do with debris. There was lots of concern it may have been debris from either Kimi's front wing or one of the many accidents or failures that have happened across the Grand Prix that may have been strewn across the circuit, and the fact that the wear was so far down on the tread depth on the tyres, essentially they would have been much less protected or much more susceptible to running over debris, and that could have been one of the concerns. Equally, there was concern that it could have been the edge of a curb that may have caused the lacerations and then the ultimate failures on those very, very worn, very stressed tyres. Pirelli's report doesn't mention any of that. The conclusions they've drawn are that this was a circuit that's very hard on the left front tyre anyway. We know that. We've seen problems in the past. We know that that's the tyre because of so many high speed and long duration right hand corners. It's the left front that is constantly building temperature and being worked and being lent on by the car so much, which is why it wears a lot, which is why it degrades and actually can overheat and blister very easily. So that's the first thing. The left front was always going to be the one that was going to be susceptible to really high wear rates. Also on top of that, the early safety car that came out triggered a chain reaction across almost the entire field that meant everybody made an early pit stop and went onto the hard tyres, knowing that they could probably just about get to the end of the race with the 40 lap guideline limit that Pirelli had set for that particular tyre. 40 laps would have been enough. It would have got them to the end, just would have taken some time management. But from Pirelli's perspective, that was the upper limit of what that particular tyre could cope with. And then on top of that, we've got cars that are faster than we've ever had before in Formula One, and importantly, much faster than they were last year in 2019. In fact, qualifying, the pole lap was 1.2 seconds quicker than the equivalent lap last year. And don't forget, these tyres were originally designed for the 2019 cars, the 2019 season. It's partly that very reason that Pirelli will be testing a new version of these tyres on Friday this week for the 70th Anniversary Grand Prix to try and get those signed off, which will have a little bit more integrity to them ahead of next year, with a potential introduction in 2021. Despite the cars having less downforce with the changes to the floor, Pirelli are still concerned that development's moved on so far from where the original design spec was, they need to address that. So Pirelli's conclusions are the cars are faster, this is a tough circuit on that particular tyre anyway, and everybody, or almost everybody, did an incredibly long stint on that particular tyre. Now, what's going to happen? They have also said within the same statement they are still planning this weekend to bring the softer range of the tyres, as was always the plan, one step softer on each of those tyres. They're still going to do that. They are going to raise the minimum tyre pressures, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, and they are highly likely to revise the guideline in terms of lap limits for the tyres which they issue to the teams. Importantly, that guideline is just that. It's a guideline. It's not an absolute rule. There's nothing in the sporting regs that limits the number of laps that you can do on a particular tyre. And actually, it's very difficult to do that because every team and every driver and every car can actually do different length stints on the same tyre because they all have different characteristics. So, if they were going to mandate, for example, that you can only do, let's say, 20 laps on the soft tyre or whatever as a maximum, or if you want to mandate that you make a minimum of 2 pit stops, that would have to be a sporting regulation change. They're not doing that. They will issue guidelines to the teams, which they do every weekend, as I say. They will give them a guideline on what they think is a safe limit for each tyre. If a team, though, chooses to go beyond that, then the risk falls to the team. They know what's just happened a week earlier. I suspect it's unlikely many people are going to take that risk given what happened at Silverstone last weekend. So let's look at the minimum tyre pressure change. Now, Pirelli always mandate legal minimum tyre pressure. Now that is in the regulations that teams have to adhere to. There are random checks on the grid at cold temperatures or pre-race temperatures to make sure they're within the limits, and they can be checked as soon as they come into the pit lane as well. They have to always be within the limits that Pirelli prescribe. They are going to raise the minimum tyre pressure. Now, why would they do that? I've got a very quick demonstration to try and explain. The teams will always err towards a lower tyre pressure because it helps them to build up tyre temperature, particularly in the fronts where they really need it. It does aid in terms of giving the tyre a little bit more deformation, enables them to get a little bit more of a contact patch and ultimately more grip. But actually it's much more about managing tyre temperatures from a lower starting pressure. So, using a bag of Colombian coffee beans and a bag of Waitrose organic rice, I'm going to try and explain what the hell I'm talking about when it comes to low tyre pressures. This here represents a tyre, obviously exaggerated, with a very low pressure. Now what I'm talking about is as the car goes round the circuit at high speed, this tyre with low pressure is able to deform. Look how the sidewall is deforming like that, but still keeping its contact patch. That's what enables you to warm it up very easily and maintain the grip. But what it did on Sunday was allow the sidewalls, as they got more and more worn around a circuit that's really hard on tyres, to become weakened, and eventually when the tread wore away, the bond between the sidewall and the tread was where the failure happened, which is why we saw the sidewalls remain intact. Even though Lewis was able to limp it all the way round, the tread stayed held within those sidewalls even though it was detached from them. So that's where the weak point ends up being. Because there's so much deformation in this low pressure tyre, you end up with a failure like that at the sidewall. If we mandate a higher tyre pressure, like with this bag of rice, you can clearly see the bag of rice is much fuller. It has more pressure inside it. It's pumped up effectively if that was a tyre. Now look what happens as we go around the corner. It doesn't deform. Look, it maintains its shape, and therefore the teams don't like it because at this point you're ending up with the tyre rolling, you ended up with less contact patch in contact with the tarmac and therefore less grip. But it gives the tyre sidewall much more integrity. It stiffens it up, gives it more integrity, and hopefully prevents a failure like the ones we had on Sunday. That is Pirelli's plan. That is what they were going with. They will announce those new tyre pressures and lap limit guidelines normally on Thursday morning. They're issued to the team in the director's notes. We don't know what they'll be yet. I think they were 25 psi minimum at the weekend and maybe 21 psi, so we know they're going to be bigger or greater than that, but we don't know what at this point. We'll find out very soon, but I hope that gives some explanation using some random objects from around the house as to what we're talking about when we talk about minimum tyre pressure and how increasing it could help prevent more failures like we saw last weekend.